What if I told you that Frodo's perilous journey to Mount Doom was not the only way to destroy the One Ring, that hidden within Tolkien's vast legendarium lie at least 10 alternative paths that could have unmade Sauron's greatest weapon? As someone who's spent countless hours poring over every letter Tolkien wrote, every draft Christopher compiled, and every hint scattered throughout the professor's works, I've discovered something remarkable. The Council of Elrond, for all their wisdom, may have overlooked possibilities that were right there in their own histories. Tonight, we're diving deep into the forgotten lore, the ancient powers, and the untapped potential that existed in Middle-earth. These aren't fan theories or wishful thinking. These are possibilities rooted in the very foundations of Tolkien's mythology. From the secret fire that Gandalf wielded to the ancient song that shaped creation itself, we'll explore 10 paths that could have changed everything. Some of these would have required knowledge lost since the Elder Days. Others demanded courage that perhaps no one possessed, but they were there, waiting in the shadows of history. So grab your favorite pipeweed, settle into your hobbit hole, and prepare to see the War of the Ring through entirely new eyes. Because sometimes, the most obvious path isn't the only one, and the road not taken might have led to salvation just the same. Picture this. Gandalf standing on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, staff raised high, declaring, "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor." In that moment of ultimate defiance against the Balrog, the Grey Wizard revealed something profound about his true nature and power. But what if that same secret fire, the flame imperishable that Eru Ilúvatar breathed into creation itself, could have been turned against the ring? The connection runs deeper than most realize, threading back to the very foundation of Ea itself. When Tolkien wrote about the secret fire in his letters, he described it as the power behind all creation, the divine spark that gave life to the Ainulindale. Gandalf, as Olorin of the Maiar, served Eru directly before his incarnation in Middle-earth. This wasn't just poetic language when he spoke of wielding this flame. It was a statement of his fundamental nature. The same power that kindled the first light, that gave voice to the music of creation, flowed through the Istari, though heavily constrained by their mortal forms. Consider what we know of the ring's creation. Sauron poured his malice, his will, and his power into the gold, but he was working within the discord he had learned from Morgoth. Every act of creation by the Ainur was ultimately a variation on Eru's original theme, even when corrupted. Sauron's ring spell, for all its terrible potency, was still a melody within the greater music. A deliberately discordant note, but part of the symphony nonetheless. This fundamental truth opens a door that the Council of Elrond never considered. The flame imperishable represents the original creative force, the power that predates all corruption, all discord, all shadow. When Gandalf faced the Balrog, itself a corrupted Maiar like Sauron, he didn't just fight fire with fire. He called upon the primordial flame that existed before Morgoth's rebellion, before the first discord entered the music. That ancient power proved capable of destroying even a creature as mighty as Durin's Bane. Why then couldn't it unmake something as relatively recent as the One Ring? The tragedy lies in the constraints placed upon the Istari. Gandalf was forbidden from matching Sauron's power directly, sent to inspire and guide rather than dominate. But there's a crucial distinction here. Destroying the ring wouldn't have been domination. It would have been correction. A restoration of harmony to the music. Tolkien himself suggested in Letter 156 that the Istari's limitations were more about method than absolute power. They were meant to work through others, yes, but in extremis, greater authority might have been granted. Imagine if Gandalf had understood this connection fully before his death and resurrection. Picture him standing in the ruins of Isengard or atop Orthanc, calling upon not just his own strength, but the very power that sang the world into being. The ring, confronted with the flame imperishable itself, might have simply ceased. not destroyed in fire like at Mount Doom, but unmade at its very foundation. Its discordant note corrected back into harmony with the greater music. The evidence for this possibility scattered throughout Tolkien's work like breadcrumbs. The Valar's ability to reshape Arda, the remaking of the world after Númenor's fall. Even the simple fact that Gandalf returned from death with greater authority than before, all point to powers that operated on a level far beyond the physical. The ring was mighty, yes, but it was still bound by the same fundamental laws that governed all creation in Tolkien's universe. What's most haunting about this possibility is how close they came to discovering it. When Gandalf spoke of the secret fire on the bridge, when he later described his confrontation with the Balrog to Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli, the pieces were all there. The White Wizard had already proven that the flame imperishable could destroy ancient evils. He just never thought to turn that same power against a golden ring. Sometimes the most profound solutions hide in plain sight, waiting for someone wise enough to see the connection between the cosmic and the personal, between the music of creation and a simple act of unmaking. There's something deeply unsettling about Tom Bombadil's complete indifference to the One Ring, something that goes far beyond mere resistance or immunity. When Frodo slipped the ring onto his finger in Tom's house and remained visible when Tom himself put it on, with no effect whatsoever, we witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible according to everything we knew about Sauron's masterwork. But Tolkien wasn't writing whimsy here. He was revealing a fundamental truth about the nature of power and time itself in Middle-earth. Tom's words to Frodo carry weight that most readers miss. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. This isn't just poetic exaggeration. In letter 153, Tolkien explicitly stated that Bombadil represents the spirit of the vanishing Oxford and Berkshire countryside, but also something far more profound, a being who exists outside the normal flow of history and power. When Tom calls himself eldest, he's making a claim that predates not just the ring, but potentially the very foundations of corruption in Arda. The key to understanding this alternative lies in recognizing what the ring actually does. It doesn't simply grant power. It creates connection, dependency, a link between the bearer and Sauron's will. Every being in Middle-earth, from the mightiest Valar to the humblest hobbit, exists within the framework of creation that Sauron can manipulate through his ring. Every being, that is, except Tom. His immunity isn't just resistance, it's complete disconnection from the entire system that makes the ring's power possible. Consider the implications. If Tom exists outside Sauron's ability to influence or corrupt, what would happen to the ring if it remained in his presence long enough? Not just a brief visit like Frodo's, but permanent residence in a realm where Sauron's will simply cannot reach. The ring maintains its power through constant connection to its master, a spiritual umbilical cord that spans any distance. But what happens when that connection encounters something that predates it entirely? Tolkien's cosmology suggests that Tom represents something from before the discord entered the music, a remnant of Arda unmarred, preserved in one small corner of the world. His power isn't about strength or will, it's about existing in a state of grace that corruption simply cannot touch. When he puts on the ring and nothing happens, he's not resisting its power. He's revealing that in his presence that power simply doesn't exist. He operates under older laws, deeper truths. The Council of Elrond dismissed Tom as an option because they believed he would simply lose the ring, forget about it, let it fall into enemy hands. But they were thinking in terms of guardianship, of protection. What if the solution wasn't protecting the ring from the world, but protecting it from Sauron himself by placing it permanently beyond his reach? In Tom's realm, surrounded by his influence, the ring might have gradually lost its connection to its master entirely. There's precedent for this kind of spiritual erosion in Tolkien's work. The Silmarils, when handled by those with evil intent, burned and caused pain. but when held by the pure of heart, they remained beautiful and harmless. The ring's power was artificial, imposed, maintained by will and malice. Sustained exposure to Tom's natural, ancient innocence might have acted like spiritual acid, slowly dissolving the bonds that held Sauron's power together. The tragedy is that this solution required something the wise of Middle-earth couldn't bring themselves to do: abandon the ring entirely. Not destroy it, not hide it, not guard it, but simply leave it in Tom's keeping and walk away. Trust that a power older than corruption could gradually cleanse what seemed uncleansable. Sometimes the greatest wisdom lies not in action, but in knowing when to step back and let deeper forces work. In a war fought with swords and fire, perhaps the answer was always going to be flowers and old forest songs. The seeing stones of Numenor hold secrets that even Aragorn and Gandalf never fully grasped. When Denethor looked into the Palantir of Minas Tirith, when Saruman wielded the Stone of Orthanc, they were engaging with technology that predated Sauron's corruption of Middle-earth by millennia. These weren't just communication devices, they were direct conduits into the mind itself, capable of creating connections that transcended physical distance and spiritual barriers, and therein lay a possibility so dangerous that perhaps it's fortunate no one attempted it. Tolkien tells us in Unfinished Tales that the Master Stone of Osgiliath was the most powerful of all the Palantiri, capable of coordinating and controlling the others. When it was lost in the river during the Kinstrife, Middle-earth lost something irreplaceable. But what if it could have been recovered? What if someone had understood the true potential of linking multiple seeing stones together while Sauron himself was psychically connected through the ring? The fundamental principle is this: the ring made Sauron vulnerable in ways he never fully appreciated. When he put it on, his consciousness expanded to encompass his entire realm. Every orc, every shadow, every whisper of his will made manifest. But consciousness, when extended, becomes a target. The Palantiri were designed to create mental bridges, and Sauron had already demonstrated his ability to dominate these connections. But what happens when the target isn't just one mind, but multiple stones working in concert? Picture this scenario: the Master Stone recovered from the Anduin, Aragorn at the Stone of Orthanc, Denethor at the Stone of Minas Tirith, and perhaps even the lost stones of the North brought back into play. Each wielder protected by their own will and purpose, but all focusing their combined psychic energy through the Palantir network directly into Sauron's consciousness while he wore the ring, not to communicate, not to spy, but to create a feedback loop of such intensity that it would shatter the mental pathways that bound the ring to its master. The precedent exists in Tolkien's own writing. When Pippin looked into the Orthanc stone, Sauron's reaction was immediate and violent. He sent the Nazgul racing across Middle-earth based on that brief contact. The Dark Lord's consciousness, for all its power, was still fundamentally finite. He could dominate individual minds through the Palantiri, but coordinated resistance had never been attempted. What the stones connected, they could also overload. Gandalf's explanation to Pippin reveals the crucial weakness. You were only in it for a moment, I think. But in that moment, all that his mind was turned to you and all his rage. Imagine that same total focus, that same complete attention, but magnified through multiple stones and sustained until Sauron's psychic defenses simply collapsed under the strain. The ring, dependent on his will for its power, might have lost cohesion in that moment of mental chaos. The knowledge needed for this approach existed within Middle-earth. Aragorn had already proven he could contest Sauron through the Orthanc stone and emerge victorious. Denethor, for all his later madness, had wrestled with the Dark Lord for years through his Palantir and never been completely dominated. The Dunedain possessed ancient lore about the stone's creation and proper use. All the pieces were there, scattered across the realm, waiting for someone to see the pattern. Of course, the risks would have been astronomical. Failure might have destroyed the minds of everyone involved, leaving Middle-earth's leaders as empty shells, while Sauron's power remained intact. But in a war where the alternative was the slow strangulation of all free peoples, perhaps such a gamble would have been worth considering. Sometimes the most effective weapon against a tyrant's strength is that same strength turned back upon itself, like a river dammed until the pressure becomes too great to contain. The forges of Valinor once rang with hammers that could shape light itself into imperishable beauty. When Gil-galad and Elendil faced Sauron on the slopes of Mount Doom, they carried weapons that had been wrought with firecraft that predated the Dark Lord's own knowledge of smithing. Aeglos and Narsil weren't just exceptional weapons. They were products of techniques learned in the light of the two trees, forged by those who had walked in Valinor before the world was marred. And hidden within that ancient knowledge lay secrets that might have unraveled Sauron's greatest work. The crucial understanding comes from Tolkien's letters about the nature of subcreation. When the Valar shaped Arda, when Owl forged the first things of beauty, they weren't just manipulating matter, they were singing reality into new forms through the music of creation. The Noldor, greatest of the Eldar in craft and lore, learned these techniques directly from their teachers in Valinor. Fëanor's creation of the Silmarils represented the pinnacle of this art, capturing the very light of the trees in crystal and jewel. But Fëanor wasn't the only master of firecraft among the Noldor. Gil-galad, last High King of the Elves in Middle-earth, carried the direct lineage of this knowledge. Elrond, who stood beside him at the siege of Barad-dûr, had been taught by those who remembered Valinor's glory. Círdan the shipwright, oldest of the elves remaining in Middle-earth, possessed lore that stretched back to the awakening at Cuivianen. Between them, they held fragments of firecraft that Sauron had never mastered, techniques that belonged to the Elder Days, when the world was younger and malleable, the ring's seeming invulnerability to all flame, except that of Mount Doom, reveals something crucial about its nature. Sauron didn't just forge it in any fire. He used the volcanic forge of Orodruin because that was the limit of his knowledge, the hottest flame he could kindle or control. But the Noldoran firecraft wasn't about heat alone. It was about harmony with the fundamental forces of creation. The difference between Sauron's forge work and true Eldoran craft was the difference between brute force and perfect understanding. Consider Narsil itself, a blade so perfectly wrought that even when shattered, its fragments retained enough power to cut through the ring and its bearer's finger. That wasn't chance or luck. That was the product of firecraft so pure that it created an edge capable of severing spiritual bonds as well as physical matter. If Isildur's broken sword could cut the ring from Sauron's hand, what might a flame kindled with the same perfection of craft accomplish against the ring itself? The knowledge wasn't entirely lost either. When Narsil was reforged into Anduril in Rivendell, that work required understanding of the original techniques. The elven smiths of Imladris didn't just repair a broken blade, they had to recreate firecraft from the Elder Days to work with metal that had been shaped in Valinor's time. If they could reforge Narsil, they possessed at least fragments of the greater firecraft that might have been turned against the ring. Elrond's knowledge runs particularly deep here. As Herald of Gil-galad, he would have been present when the greatest works of the late Elder Days were planned and executed. He witnessed the forging of Vilya, mightiest of the three rings, and understood how Celebrimbor, himself of the House of Fëanor, had surpassed even his ancestors' techniques in creating objects of power that Sauron could never corrupt. That same understanding, applied to destruction rather than creation, might have found ways to unmake what seemed unmakeable. The tragedy lies in how close they came to this realization. When the council debated the ring's fate, they focused on the obvious solution, Mount Doom. without considering that the fire they needed might be kindled by art, rather than found in their very halls, stood beings who remembered when light was first captured in crystal, when the Silmarils held the unmarred radiance of Valinor itself. Sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we carry within ourselves, and the Noldor carried secrets of fire and light that could have burned away even Sauron's darkness. The straight road westward from the Grey Havens leads to more than just refuge for the weary. It leads to Valinor itself, the undying lands, where the light of the two trees still shines in memory and in fact. When Frodo sailed west with Gandalf and the elves at the end of his tale, he was entering a realm where corruption simply cannot exist, where the very air breathes with the original music of creation. But what would have happened if the One Ring had made that journey not as a burden to be escaped, but as a darkness to be cleansed? Tolkien's cosmology makes clear that Valinor exists in a state of grace that predates the marring of Arda. When the Valar withdrew there after Morgoth's defeat, they didn't just retreat. They preserved a fragment of the world as it was meant to be, unmarred by discord or shadow. The light that in the Silmaril aboard Vingilo isn't just beautiful, it's literally the light of creation itself, the radiance that existed before corruption entered the world. In such a place, what power could Sauron's ring retain? The precedent exists in the very mythology Tolkien created. When the elves reach Valinor, their spirits are renewed, their weariness healed, their connection to the music of creation restored. The undying lands don't just preserve life, they restore it to its original purpose and purity. The ring, for all its terrible power, was still a created thing, bound by the same fundamental laws that governed all existence in Middle-earth. In Valinor, those laws operated under different principles entirely. Consider what we know of the ring's essential nature. It was a spiritual parasite, feeding on the connection between bearer and the music of creation, corrupting that bond to serve Sauron's will. But in Valinor, every being exists in perfect harmony with the original music. There would be no discord for the ring to exploit, no spiritual weakness for it to corrupt. Like a disease trying to infect a perfectly healthy body, the ring's malevolence might simply find no purchase in a realm of absolute spiritual health. The journey itself would have been part of the cure. The straight road doesn't just cross physical distance. It's a passage through the circles of the world, a path that leads gradually away from the marred creation of Middle-earth toward the perfect realm of the Valar. Each league westward would take the ring further from Sauron's influence, deeper into waters blessed by Ulmo himself, closer to shores where Manwë's eagles fly beneath stars that remember their first kindling. Gandalf's presence on such a journey would have been crucial. As a Lorin, he belonged to Valinor by right, and his authority there would have been far greater than his constrained power in Middle-earth. When he told the Balrog that he was a servant of the secret fire, he was speaking as one who had walked in Valinor before time began. In his true home, surrounded by his fellow Maiar and the Valar themselves, Gandalf might have found ways to call upon powers that his earthly mission had forbidden him to use. The elves who remained in Middle-earth, Elrond, Galadriel, Círdan, all retained the right to sail west when their labors were finished. They could have carried the ring to Valinor, not as a military expedition, but as a pilgrimage of healing. In the halls of Manwë, in the gardens of Yavanna, in the presence of those who sang the world into being, the ring might have been gradually cleansed of its malice, transformed from an instrument of domination into, well, perhaps nothing at all. The most beautiful aspect of this solution is its gentleness. No fire, no violence, no desperate last stands on the edge of destruction. Just a slow journey toward healing, toward light, toward the restoration of harmony. In a tale marked by so much loss and sacrifice, perhaps the most fitting end would have been not destruction, but redemption. The ring's malice washed away by waves that remember when the world was young, its power dissolved in light that has never known shadow. The Silmarils of Fëanor contain something that no power in Middle-earth can corrupt, the original light of the two trees of Valinor, blessed and hallowed by Varda herself, before shadow ever fell upon the world. When Tolkien wrote of these jewels in the Silmarillion, he created more than just beautiful artifacts. He established objects that existed in perfect opposition to everything Sauron represented. And therein lies a possibility so profound that it might have not just destroyed the One Ring, but purified it entirely. To understand this approach, we must grasp what the Silmarils actually contained. The light of Telperion and Lorelin wasn't just illumination, it was the visible manifestation of the music of creation in its purest form, the harmony that existed before Melkor's discord poisoned the song. When Varda hallowed the Silmarils, she wasn't just blessing them, she was sealing within them a fragment of Arda unmarred, a piece of the world as Eru intended it to be. No evil could touch them, no shadow could dim them. No corruption could alter their essential nature. The crucial insight comes from understanding how the Silmarils affected different beings. To those with pure hearts, they were objects of surpassing beauty. To those with evil intent, they burned with holy fire that no earthly flame could match. Morgoth himself, mightiest of the Ainur after Manwë, could not bear their touch. The jewels seared his hands and left him marked forever. If they could burn the Dark Lord himself, what might they do to his servant's greatest work? But this isn't about destruction through burning, it's about something far more profound. The Silmarils didn't just resist evil, they actively transformed darkness into light. When Erendil bore his Silmaril across the sky, its radiance didn't just illuminate the night, it brought hope to all who looked upon it, renewed courage in the hearts of the faithful, reminded Middle-earth that no darkness, however deep, could extinguish the light of creation itself. Imagine if the One Ring, instead of being cast into Mount Doom, had been brought into direct contact with one of the remaining Silmarils, not wielded against it as a weapon, but integrated with it in a process of spiritual alchemy. The ring contained Sauron's malice, his will to dominate, his discord with the music of creation. The Silmaril contained the perfect opposite, harmony, purity, the uncorrupted light of the world's first dawn. The knowledge for such integration existed within Middle-earth, preserved in the memory of those who had witnessed Fëanor's work. Elrond had seen the Silmarils in their glory, had been present when Erendil took his jewel into the sky. Galadriel herself was of the Noldor, cousin to Fëanor, and had walked in the light of the two trees before their destruction. Between them, they might have possessed the understanding needed to attempt such a union. The process wouldn't have been simple craftsmanship, but rather a form of spiritual engineering operating on the deepest levels of creation itself. The ring's gold would need to be reforged not in fire alone, but in the presence of the Silmaril's light, allowing the hallowed radiance to permeate every atom of its being. The malice that Sauron had poured into the ring would encounter the blessed light that Varda had sealed into the jewel, and in that meeting, corruption would face something it had never encountered, absolute, uncompromising purity. What emerges from such a union might not have been a ring at all, but something entirely new, perhaps a jewel that contained both the memory of Sauron's malice and its complete transformation into harmony. Instead of destroying the ring's power, this approach might have redeemed it, turning an instrument of domination into a beacon of hope. In a world marked by so much loss and corruption, perhaps the greatest victory would have been not the destruction of evil, but its transformation into something beautiful and pure. In the beginning was the music, and in the music was all that ever was, or ever could be. When Tolkien wrote the Ainulindala, he wasn't just creating a creation myth. He was establishing the fundamental law that governs all existence in his universe. Reality itself is song, and all discord can be corrected through perfect harmony. The One Ring, for all its terrible power, was ultimately just another note in that vast symphony, a deliberate discord introduced by Sauron's malice. But discord, however loud, can always be corrected by those who remember the original.